Hi, AZeasyflow18. Is it 18? I think you said your name is Clark. I'm Elder Roxas. Thank you for responding to my comments. I thought I would make a video response instead of trying to type out all the things I was trying to type out. I would be interested in seeing the stats that you're talking about with regards to cohabilitation, but I personally think it's actually really demonstrable that people who live together tend to get to know one another better than people who don't, whether they're having sex or not. And so I think that there are lots of cases where people will be divorced and they'll say, I had no idea what this person was like to live with, good God. And then they get divorced and perhaps for the better, right? But I also think it can be said, regardless of the numbers and stats, that many people do live together for years and then they get married and then they have children. And that's actually a lot of people that I know. And I don't think that any of those people that I know I could say were unstable. In fact, all of those people are the most grounded people that I know. And so I just doubt, I'm skeptical of the concrete facticity of the cohabilitation, divorce relation that you're talking about. In fact, I think that they're really different. Marriage is this historically evolved thing that has come with some legal properties and economic privileges and social privileges, and it dresses up relationships to mean a certain way in societies. And that's the result of a long course of historical development. And so marriage doesn't have, it's really dynamic and it's not fixed at all. It doesn't have this kind of like permanency to it. I understand that there are religions that kind of attribute an eternal significance to marriage, and that's, one thing. Uh, that they kind of correlate the idea of eternal love with eternal marriage and whatever's going on there. I just think that it's not as clear as all that. I think, in fact, that to seek a direct correlation between cohabilitation and divorce is rather an logically unsound correlation. They're just very different human experiences that overlap in certain ways and don't really mesh in other ways. Uh, anyway, why is sex a surface level of understanding somebody? I think arguably sex is actually a really deep level of understanding yourself and someone else, like skin deep. What is the proper way of understanding love? I am halfway through my 20s. You seem like you're somewhere in your 20s. Maybe you're not. Um, what do either of us know about love? I don't know about you. I've been in love maybe a couple times, and I'm still trying to suss it out actually. But I don't know how I would talk to a young person about it. I think what I would try to say maybe is that I understand myself a little bit better now. I understand how I am and why I am a little bit better now than I did, and so I'm a little less prone to experimentation. And I think that there's a difference between experimentation and curiosity. And I think that there's more to me emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, grammatically, but mainly physically, and that's because I've grown physically in the past 5 to 7 years, and there's no greater period of physical development than when you're a young teenager. And so, did I experiment with sex when I was a teenager? Definitely not, but I still felt it necessary to figure out how to make out and a couple of other things before I decided to try to find someone who I was going to spend the rest of my life with. And I can tell you from my background experience that people who get married and don't know how to make out ends really poorly for them. As well as some other things. But let me tell you a bit about my background because it's actually related to my biggest question for you, which is I'm wondering if abstinence only for you is abstinence only for marriage, because I just don't think that that's very beneficial for everybody. I think that because I don't think that it's universally reasonable to expect everyone. everyone to marry. Uh, I'm from Utah, and being from Utah, I was born and raised in the Mormon religion. I'm not in Utah anymore, and I'm not Mormon anymore. And I will also never say to a Christian that Mormons are Christian, because Mormons aren't Christian. But Mormons kind of assume that everyone's going to get married, either in this life or the next. It's very, like, fundamental to their religion, and not just their theological perspectives, but that's the cultural milieu that I was born and raised in, was the idea of everyone getting married, eventually. And so, from that background, I can tell you that it's actually really ineffective to talk to young people that way. It may even be too early, anytime before your 20s, to talk to somebody about marriage, because it's just so complex. To try to compact its cultural significance as an institution is actually really difficult, I think, for young people. But rather than not talk about marriage, I think that the conversation needs to be as open and as broad as possible. And so I would never say we should not talk about marriage. That means that I would not say, on the other hand, that we should not talk about sex. Especially in Utah. In Utah, it was recently discovered that chlamydia and gonorrhea were the highest, most frequently communicable diseases. That means that it was more likely for a person to get chlamydia or gonorrhea than it was for them to get the chickenpox or the flu. And not just like anybody, people under 24. And so there's a lot of evidence that there's a lot of people in Utah that are young that are having a lot of sex, and they're having a lot of unsafe sex, and they're getting diseases. And 6% of Utah births just 3 years ago were teen mothers. And 6% might sound like a lot, but that's actually thousands of young women. Some of them were 15 years old. And so, from personal experience and also just like telling you what it's like in Utah, I can tell you that at a statewide level, the abstinence-only curricula is actually really counterproductive. It is because there's no talk about sex. That means that there's no talk about safe sex. But in addition to that, that means that these legislatures and educators and sometimes the parents are assuming, quite falsely, that young people are not having sex, and that's just not true. They expect young people to kind of hold to that culturally dominant gold standard, magical standard of marriage, and actually they're not doing that. And it's leading to disease and pregnancies. And I think that those rates would go down if the sex ed was a bit more comprehensive. I'm not saying that it will, but I think it would certainly be a lot less. You say that it's important for kids to learn how to think and not what to think. I agree, and this is what I believe, not from what I've read in books. No matter how old or how new those books are, this is not what I've seen in movies. I will say really quickly that I am a movie buff. I really like film history. I'm interested in being a filmmaker, and I think that there's actually a significant, rich wealth of knowledge about the human experience of marriage and love and sex in the cinema. And perhaps, as you say, it's the case, I think it definitely is the case, that pop culture mainstream representations of sex and love and marriage are actually really negative. But I actually think that films, lots of films, have really positive, really good, smart things to offer that could be taught about love and sex and marriage. But that's something else. So I can only speak from my personal experience with sex, with trying to connect with others, and that idea of greed, idolatry that you're talking about. I think that to idolize the body. Idolatry is such a weird word to me. I understand what it means. I'm a literature major, but I think that to say that it's morally wrong is one thing. I don't really get that, but I do think that what's morally wrong is abusing the body as a part of creation, either as part of God's creation, as a part of the evolutionary processes, as a part of star matter, as a product of whatever someone wants to believe it is. It is a really marvelous creation of the body. It's really quite a thing, and to behold. And to idolize it is one thing. Again, I'm not sure really what that means. I think that that's actually highly contestable. What seems morally wrong to me is abusing that body, abusing that creation. And so, to speak of greed in a sexual relationship uh, is really negative. To talk about sex as having a use value and an exchange value, and you can kind of throw it into circulation in society as a commodity, that is a distortion, and I think I've seen the devastation of that in my own life, in the lives of other people that I've known. But human beings, as long as we've had any knowledge of ourselves, we've had needs. All kinds of needs: food based needs, land, arts and entertainment. A lot of needs, and sex is one of them. And the way that we've chosen to deal with that need, all of those needs, kind of varies. And so I definitely think that to treat any need as as having a use value and an exchange value, and to kind of like put into a consumer system is absolutely terrible. But to be perfectly honest with you, I don't see the difference between doing that with sex and doing that with marriage. I actually think that marriage also is very prone to having that kind of use value, exchange value, uh, commodity representation, where it's kind of this marketable thing. I definitely think that exists in our society, and I actually think that that's quite recent. I don't think that that's always been. So, the Romans certainly didn't do that with marriage, and that's where we get marriage from. But to have those needs again, I definitely see how like feeding them into this kind of consumerist mentality is wrong, but I don't see how sex directly does that. And if it does, as you kind of suggest, I don't see how it's any different from marriage. Um, Love and sex don't seem like mutually exclusive categories to me. I think that love can be sexual and sex can be loving. And I think that definitely love cannot be sexual. There are ways in which love is not sexual, I mean. And there are ways in which sex is not loving. But I feel like the categories you kind of deal with are kind of somehow mutually exclusive. I think that you would agree that there's kind of overlap. But to say that abstinence is a good part of sex education, I would agree that telling people that that is an option that they should consider is a good thing. But telling them that they should abstain for marriage, that's where I think I lose you. I'm not sure why that's something that you're arguing. Because I just don't think everyone can get married. Not everyone can get married. Not everyone even wants to get married. Some people want to get married and can't. Uh, for a number of reasons. A number of reasons. And coming from the culture that I described, I actually was part of that. I can tell you that telling somebody that they have to choose between celibacy and marriage as a life choice is really demanding. Really, really demanding, because it's more than just need. Uh, Physical intimacy is such a part of our humanity. To tell someone that they have to deny even a small part of that for themselves for the rest of their lives if they don't enter into a marriage, but they want a long-term monogamous relationship with someone that can involve sex, that's so demanding. And I think you might be surprised to find that's a lot of people. A lot of people. And telling all of those people that they have to deny something like that of themselves is actually, I think, really, really negative. And I can tell you from being in Utah, it's also counterintuitive and counterproductive. And at a certain level, even kind of hypocritical to talk that way to young people about sex. I think that the conversation should be as open as possible. And to get them to learn how to think about those things, and, hopefully eventually do more than just think about it. Restricting and controlling the conversation is not the way to go. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Wondering what your thoughts are. This video was kind of probably a little rambly. I'm sorry about that. Thank you